Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And we have a gentleman who you probably think should be on the tube in London going to the city. But in actual fact, he's a farmer and he's known as Mark the bowler hat farmer. Mark well done, sir, from Suffolk.
Indeed, Liz. How are we?
We're absolutely wonderful. Only too pleased to have you on. Anything to do
Thank
with
you.
agriculture. My father was a pig farmer, as you know. And as I said to somebody before, he's a cross between uh, Del Boy and my father, a gentleman with a big laugh. Mark, good afternoon. Tell us about farming as we're going at the moment in the UK.
If you want my honest opinion, Liz, I think we're in trouble. I think not only the farmers are in trouble, they're not getting the support they need from the government. We obviously all know why. An agenda is at foot, and we're not part of it. I think it's fair to say. Um, and more so than anything, we're being pushed and pulled at every opportunity to pull farming to bits. And I mean to really dissect the industry. Like you say, Liz, you come from your dad was a pig farmer. That was my first major job, was working on a pig farm of tens of thousands of pigs, all in sheds. I have to say it wasn't a very nice way to farm. However, um, it put food on people's plates and at the right money, and people were grateful for that. And I think, unfortunately, where we're headed, and I think, Liz, when I started talking about all this stuff a few years ago, and people were like, "Oh, bless you, you're completely barking mad." I think what I was talking about is coming to fruition. I think that by this winter, we're going to see some very, very difficult times for people to put food on the plate. I really do. I run a full time fruit and veg wholesale company and work the farm as well. Work the farm to grow stuff for the wholesale company. And that's my real passion, Liz, is the growing side, whether that's the animals or the vegetables. That's where my passion lies, and that's what I'm trying to inspire more people to get involved in, and to purchase direct from farmers as well, because that, I think, is one of the really clever things that happened in the last 50 years. So when I was a child, everyone had huge gardens and allotments, and certainly where I come from in the countryside, everyone had gardens, allotments. We all had, you know, side of the field what we could quite happily farm or something. And what you've seen is that ability for people to be able to look after and fend for themselves slowly slip away. And now, Liz, I don't do politics. I don't care if people vote red, blue, yellow, green, or bloody orange with pink spots. I don't care. What I do know is when Tony Blair came into power, after Margaret Thatcher being in power when I was a kid, and we were told sort of 16, 17 as I left school under Margaret Thatcher, everything in the world is yours. It's an oyster. Go find it, go enjoy it, make money, enjoy life. And then we had a very different change. And I think we got to this, oh, don't worry, stay at home and we'll look after you. Well, I don't want no one to look after me. And, I've seen a lot of my friends, and I'm going to say this, sponge off the benefit system, Liz. And that really, really infuriates me, because all I want to do is work as many hours as possible, earn as much as possible, and achieve something, not just for myself, for other people as well. When I was running a care farm for 8 years for a charity, we had hundreds upon hundreds of people come there that had got mental health, physical health issues, kids with ADHD, you name it. We had those people come through, and they got so much out of working the land and being part of it. Liz, one of the things that always intrigued me was how excited kids could get finding half a dozen eggs to take home to mum for something that I or you might take for such a basic thing. And we would see kids come with such passion, and they would sit with tears in their eyes getting on the bus to go home, how excited they were going to be to tell mum that they fed the chicken gave them the eggs, and to take them home for dinner and then eat them and then come back and tell us again, oh my God, mum was so excited about the eggs. Really? And we take this for granted. And I think that's the bit now what's happened, Liz, is people have been manipulated, played with, and detracted so much to get them away from physically having anything to do with the land. And I think spiritually, that is one of the biggest things we're up against at the minute. I am I a spiritual person? I don't know. I definitely know I'm not religious. I definitely know that the universe will provide, because it always has every time I've asked it for something. Does that make me spiritual? I'd like to think that I'm certainly more in touch with my entire body, and my attachment to the earth. I haven't been to the doctors for 38 years. I'm 56. I've not been in 38 years, apart from to get a vasectomy, I will say. So when you look at the medical profession, of what they have to go through, 8 years worth of training, and they get, I think it's 1 or 2 days on nutrition. Well, these people shouldn't be advising anybody. I've got school kids, what I've trained in nutrition, what would know more than them. So I think for my side, I do my talks there's now on, especially about the breakdown of agriculture and how that's come about. I mean, this year we've seen several things come to play. Obviously, my personal opinion here, you can see today we've got a beautiful blue sky here. I'm sat by the pond and it's beautiful. There's flies about, hedgerows to encourage the flies and so forth. And I think from my side that we're in a very unique position at the minute, because we've got the opportunity to step back 50 years rather than step forward. I saw Richard Vobes had done a video this morning talking about how the world's changed in that 50 years, and how we're now at the position with eye recognition in supermarkets and all of that. I ain't taking part. We've got a little farm shop that we opened this year, this last month on the farm here. It's built on a truss box. We don't have any staff in it. Grow some stuff on the farm. We buy some stuff in through the wholesale side. We've got local farmers producing stuff for us and putting in the shop. It takes £1,000 a week, Liz. Now, the reason I get excited about it taking £1,000 a week is because it's £1,000 a week the supermarkets aren't taking. And I sat down and I was talking to the guys at work, and I was saying, as a company, we spend about £50,000 to £80,000 a year dependent with Tesco's. And I'm going to name them because they're the company we spend it with. And this is on fuel and AdBlue and all the other things what we just get drawn into. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going to stop that as well then. So I cut my Tesco's card up and sent it back to them and said, we're going to be withdrawing our support of your services. Thank you very much. And for me now, I'm looking at it and I'm going, that's 100 grand plus a year that I have taken away from them. Just me. You imagine this, if we could get a whole army of people doing that. A whole army of people that want to set up a farm shop, want to set up a food hub, want to set up, or just want to stop spending their £100 a week at the supermarkets and go spend it somewhere else. Because if they start spending it back with farmers, the farmers get so much more out of that pound. If you take a pound for pound basis, I think I mentioned to you earlier as we were speaking, through the wholesale side, I buy in carrots from farmers, and we can pay dependent on £1.20 to £1.40 a bunch for those, and we sell those at £2. The supermarkets sell them at £1.79, but pay the farmer 30 pence. It just doesn't stack up for the farmer, or the consumer. That you could understand if they said, well, we're at 80 pence with them, you can understand it. But when you look at how much them sods are earning and just how much they're raping and pillaging out of the financial system, I say their power sits in how much money they take, and we need to take that away. 100%, just take it from under their feet, take away that power, and it knocks up, Liz. We know that Vanguard and BlackRock and people like that are always in the background of all these companies as their main shareholders, and I say, take it away. So I think from the farming side, I think we're in trouble. I think that we've seen with geoengineering, we've seen so much rainfall this year. This pond, what you can see, I don't know if you can see behind me, is right on the brink of, it's actually dropped a bit in the last few days because it's dried out a bit, but it's always on that brink of spilling over because it's just been so wet where we are this year. We planted winter barley and wheat back in tail end of last autumn, and that got washed out. That more or less didn't come up at all. That was just rotted off in the ground. So we kept saying, it's all right, what we'll do is we'll put some spring barley in. And spring kind of came and went and we didn't see it. And we've finally, just the last few days, started putting, we drilled a couple of weeks ago and got some in on a nice day. We've got some more in this week when it's been dry. But Liz, is it going to have time to even come to fruition? That's yet to be seen. Sugar beet, our sugar beet factory is in Bury St Edmunds, where I live. We've got a huge sugar beet factory there, Liz. Most of the sugar beet locally is still in the ground from last year. They haven't even bothered lifting it. They couldn't get the equipment on the ground to do anything with it. I went to the carrot farm the other day, and the carrot farmer said, and I have to smile because he owns the farm, and Sainsbury's own the plant that does all the washing and grading for their supermarkets and so forth, and we're allowed to go in there and purchase off the farmer side of things. And I was talking to him, and he said, well, just so you know, Mark, he said, the carrot farm's now closing until about October time. And I said, sorry? I said, you normally only close for about 6 weeks, to clean down the factory and so forth. He said, got a bit of a problem. Come with me. Well, I went out the back door of the factory. In the middle of the field sits a 30, I don't know what one of these tractors costs, but probably a couple of £300,000, Liz. And there's the harvester on the back of it costing the same amount of money. So you've got £500,000 or £600,000, and it's literally buried up to the cab where it's sunk in the field. And I said to him, oh, that's not good. How are you going to get that out? He said, we can't. He said, we can't get anything near it to get it out. So it's going to have to sit there. He said, and there's another one over there on the other end of the field. So they're sitting with £1 million worth of equipment buried up to the neck in mud, and they can't get it out of the ground. They can't get the carrots out of the ground. They can't get the tractors out of the ground. So where does it end, Liz? The potatoes this year, I had a friend of mine messaged me the other day, and he said, just to let you know, he said, we've only got 17% of our potatoes in this year. Well, when you take all of these things, now, bear in mind, Liz, that from the farming community side, if you take potatoes, sugar, and let's say wheat and barley, that's a huge amount of food that we consume. And especially when you get down to things like carrots and parsnips, what they're saying, they can't even get out of the ground. Where do we go from there? Because it forces the price up. We know that. That's part of the agenda. We understand that. Farmers then look at it and go, is it worth me continuing? The answer is probably no. So then where do they go? Well, then they turn to the opportunity to this retirement fund, what's available at, please sign here, sell your farm. We'll give you the best money you're ever going to get for it, and over £100,000 in cash to walk away and, retire with. A lot of these farmers are going, well, I can sell my kit. I'll get, several £1 million in from that. I can sell the farm. I can get X amount of £1 million for that. Why on earth do I need to put myself through this abuse every day of the week? I don't want my children to go into it. I told them to get a new profession years ago. But what excites me, and I have to say this, Liz, and I have spoken about this several times now, what I have seen on several of farms where I go onto to buy produce is now that it's not granddad handing the farm to the son and the son eventually giving it to the grandson. It's skipping a generation. Granddad, who's farmed all his life, told his son he didn't want him to do it. So son went off and got another job in banking or solicitor, whatever it might have been. The grandson's come along, or granddaughter, I've seen several of these as well. Granddaughter comes along and she says, but granddad, I want to farm the farm. And it's getting handed down to them now. And I've seen this with one guy I buy a lot of stuff off up in Loudon, Lowestoft, come down through the generations and kind of skip in one. And what's happened now is that you're getting a lot of these younger generation that want to change how farming's done. And this is another big thing. What I'm seeing, Liz, is we're coming away from, my university is literally just over the field from where I'm sat here now. And we were taught all about commercial farming. And I mean commercial farming, big herds of animals, big tractors, big amounts of fertilizers, put as much weed killer on as you need because it just doesn't matter what you do. And I came out of that very despondent, I have to say, after, spending most of my life with, at the point of growing up, I spent most of my time with my grandfather, who's an old school farmer, had kept dairy cows, and said to me, he said, what you got to understand, boy, he said, is you've got to have a mixed farm. And he always spoke very Suffolk, and he was very factual about what we've got to do to survive in the world. And he, Liz, I look back, we've really, I don't know if I'm going to say rose-tinted glasses, but with absolute fondness towards my grandparents. My mum's parents were the most amazing grandparents. They had one ambition and one desire on this planet, and that was to teach me everything they knew. and that was what their job was, was to hand knowledge down and to make sure that you could look after yourself, whether that was financially, physically, emotionally. I remember Granddad telling me one day, he said, he was talking about he'd met someone on the bus going into town who said they'd got mental health issues. And he said to him, well, what's that? And the guy said, I've a lot of time I went down and so talking about, how upset he was with life and what was going on. And Granddad said, what you need is a good day's work. And I do think, there's a lot to be said for the fact, Liz, that people now play all of their lives out on social media. They play most of their time out on a mobile phone or a laptop, whatever that might be, on chatting to people who they probably don't really know, who tell them their life's great, and really they're just talking a load of like everyone else is. And I think the mental health side has been very much escalated and brought on because of the likes of social media and and the press and MSN and whatever that might look like. And I think, as opposed to where you or I would go, well, I'll go and spend the day in the garden, set some runner beans or, muck the chickens out or whatever it might be. So I think that a lot of these mental health issues, I'm not saying it's not a real thing, and please don't take me out of context there, but I do think that a lot of what we're seeing in the mental health side is because people haven't been active in doing something to keep their mind busy. So I think, back to the farming side, we've seen all these payments coming through to the farmers. We've seen, options for them to leave the farming side. The options, if they stay in the farming side, not to farm is ridiculous. I spoke to someone this morning who's like a land agent. He said, I don't know if you've heard about this, Mark. He said, but it's now up to £340 an acre not to farm. He said, I watched your video where you were talking about £250 an acre. It's up at £340 now. He said, they're desperate to stop people growing food. He said, but here's the problem. What farmer, if you're sitting on 1,000 acres, who's not going to want to take £340,000 payment for 1 year, rather than grow potatoes? If you're lucky, you might break even if you can get them out of the ground, if you don't lose your equipment drying. And I think this is where the challenge sits now, Liz. I think we're in a position we've got to re-evaluate farming. And what I would say on that, I spend a lot of time. I'm a coordinator with the Land Workers Alliance, and that's all small independent growers and farmers and producers that have 1 to 3, 5, 10 acres, perhaps. None of them are big farmers. They're all what I deem as regenerative farming. They're not lip service farming where they say, oh, well, we're setting these 200 acres here down to Lays because that's good for the environment. Oh, get a grip. What we really need here are some people who know what's actually going on how to make the soil nutritional, how to get plants to, come through and really grow and develop and, nurture that life. So that's the changes I'm seeing at the bottom end. In the smaller farms, we're seeing this massive transition. The transition's coming from the younger generation, I will say, not so much the older generation. That transition is something what Catherine and I, funnily enough, from the PFFA, were talking the other day, and we're saying we're in a unique position at the minute because what we actually need is to be in the position of having a transitional period. So for big farms to transition across to the new way of farming. And that wasn't offered to them. So why wasn't that offered? This transition, as far as they're concerned, is happening by, right, we've cut nitrogen, you can't use it. Oh, farmers will look at it and go, well, that's all right, I'll use, animal manure instead. Well, you can't because we're going to kill all them as well. A friend rang me this morning from the States. He said, I don't know if you've heard about this. He said, but they've shut down the cattle industry almost completely now in America. They're because we've got bird flu. This big old beautiful thing called bird flu is obviously it's jumped from chicken to chicken, it's jumped from chicken to cow, cow to cow, and now they're worried about cow to person. What a load of tosh. When I was a kid, Granddad would happily, if the chickens were sneezing in the latter part of the autumn, he'd say, "Oh, that's good. Get the cold out of the way now." Same with cows. All the old farmers will tell you that blue tongue, what they say is deadly virus and it kills all the. It's no more than the flu. If you give them 3 to 5 days, they're over it and they're back on their feet and, you're away again. I think that the nonsense with TB has slaughtered the dairy industry in this country. We've got badgers here on the farm and, as we don't have any cows here at present, but my uncle said the other day, Ray was saying the other day about it. He said, so what you got to understand is, he said, with badgers, he said, if you get them tested and they haven't got TB, you want to keep them because, now bear in mind, this is coming from someone with the farming knowledge. He said, if you keep the badger, what hasn't got TB, it will stop badgers with TB coming onto the area. So, that knowledge is going to be lost when the next generation of farmers are gone, because people like Ray, who have got just so much knowledge, people like my granddad, who he would tell you any week of the year what was going to be in the garden. He knew exactly where the seasons were. We don't anymore. The knowledge what they had, I laugh because my mum, I said to my mum the other day, I've got to go and buy some canes to put the runner beans up this year because I lost all my canes last year in the bad weather and stuff. And she said, well, why don't you do what your granddad did? She said, just go down the hedges and just cut out some hazel. And I was like, well, that's all good and well, Mum, but are we allowed to do that anymore? Because these days you don't really know what you're allowed to do. But Granddad would have just been quite happy, he'd have just gone down the side of the hedge, took out what he wanted, left what he didn't want, and he'd have took them all home, chopped it all to the size as he wanted. The rest of it would have gone for kindling, been put in the coal shed for, to use in the winter. And you think to yourself, surely at some point, we've got to step back and get a little bit of sensibility. I'll tell you something. I got a phone call yesterday, and a friend of mine was savage. So she keeps goats, and she milks the goats, and from the goat's milk, she makes goat's cheese and goat's butter, and ends up with whey. Okay, and she said to me, she's been taking it to a friend of ours who runs a small care farm, and she's been taking it there to feed to the pigs. DEFRA turned up this week and told her that she couldn't do that anymore because of foot and mouth. And because that was the food produce waste and it was come from a kitchen, she can no longer take it to another farm and feed it to their animals. And I said, well, they don't actually slaughter their pigs. So their pigs are just there until they die because they're there for the care farm side. So it doesn't make any difference what you feed them because you can get a license to, to say you not putting the meat into the food chain. And she said, yeah, I accepted all that and told them all that. She said, and they said, no, this is because the spread of foot and mouth is rife in our area. Rife. Well, that's the first I've heard about it. And I get DEFRA messages, every time there's an outbreak of anything, what they think I need to know about. While we're on that, Liz, I'm just going to tell you something. I've got to tell you about something because, they've just brought out this new policy for everyone's got to register their chickens. You know what that's about? I have a thinking of I know what this is about. So there's about 100,000 farmers registered on the DEFRA alert system that get an alert if there's an outbreak of anything from bird flu to foot and mouth to TB, whatever it might be. We get an outbreak notification to say that, we have to be careful in the area and that they'll keep us informed. And there's an exclusion zone around the farm, right? Now, if you've got a chicken farmer and he's got an exclusion zone of 5 or 10 miles around his farm, and you are in the position that you haven't got another farm for 20 miles, it doesn't really matter. The bird flu is not likely to spread. Now, they need it to spread to bring in the next part of this absolute nonsense BS agenda, and that is that they need it to spread. So what they do is they now register every household, and where a lot of farmers are waking up to things and they get an alert and they go, that's nice. I don't buy into anything DEFRA or the government tells me. Molly Mop, who's got 5 chickens in the garden, and Mrs. Smith, who's got 12 in her garden, now gets an alert come through and says there's been an outbreak. So she quarantines hers and rings DEFRA because one of them's got a cough and says, I think we've got bird flu. They don't test them. They don't need to. They just come out and cull them. Well, then it moved the exclusion zone across further and further and further until they've got everybody they want in the entire country sewn up. And that's what this is about. This is about grabbing more power and doing away with more animals. And if people can't see that, Liz, then something's wrong. And people are going to find themselves, you know, Klaus Schwab said, did he not? We will eat bugs. Well, actually said, you will eat bugs and you will be happy. I won't be eating bugs and I won't be happy about it. I think what they have been very clever at doing is now gearing it so there's going to be a lot less meat on the planet. This outbreak in America to cull all the cattle in America, obviously, as you know, Liz, massive industry. The chicken industry as well. We're going to see a lot of people in America, I think, in the next year, very, very hungry. And it isn't just going to be America, it's going to be the whole of Western civilization. Everywhere where we rely on the food supply chain, we're going to be in trouble. Simple as that. I'll give you another example. One of my main wholesalers, who's a huge importer of fruit and vegetables, they're the biggest in the country, company up in just outside Birmingham. They farm nearly 6,000 acres as well themselves. Messaged me this week to tell me that, Mark, I'm really sorry, just to let you know that there'll be limited availability for the following. So, tender stem broccoli, tomatoes, iceberg lettuce, broccoli, because that's all coming in ice pack. From all of this is from Spain, okay? And there was lists of citrus fruit and everything else because they've had such bad weather they haven't been able to pick, or they haven't been able to sell, they haven't been able to produce, whatever it might be, export costs, whatever it is, they're using as today's excuse. So all that's stopping to come into the country. Peru is now not sending any avocados out of the country because they can't afford to pick them. And you look at all this information and you think people say, oh, don't worry, British farmers don't grow any food, because what's going to happen is we're going to just import it. We're not going to import nothing. It states in the 2030 agenda, I think you'll agree with this, Liz, states in the 2030 agenda that by 2030, we will not have any ships, planes, trains, boats, automobiles, whatever traveling into the country. So that takes out the food. And people say, oh, no, it doesn't include that. Listen, if you genuinely believe they're going to let us have food brought in from overseas when they're telling us the carbon footprint is the problem, you will get taxed out of existence if you think you're going to import an avocado 6,000 miles to eat it.
Yeah.
And I just, so, look, put all these little things into place, Liz, and you start to understand where they're going. You start to understand how they're rolling it out, and you start to understand how dire the situation is. Come back to what I said earlier, the bit what excites me is the younger generation starting to wake up to this. They're the ones who want to change farming. They're the ones who are getting the growing going. They're the ones who understand box schemes. So they're looking more to supply box schemes. My cousin, here's a classic example. My cousin Mike, it's a second cousin, very religious, rang me and he says, Mark, I need to chat. I said, what's the matter, Mike? He said, I had a conversation with God last night and God told me I've got to grow more food. He said, because I've got to feed people. I said, okay. I said, well, you know that I'm not religious, but I'm on the same journey. Spiritually, I think that's where I am at the minute, that I've been told by something, I don't know what you call it, that I need to be involved in producing food and telling other people about the production of food and grow their own and getting involved in farm shops and whatever that might look like. Veg box schemes and so forth. Anyway, he applied for a council farm right next to his house. He's the pastor of the local church, a Freedom Church, and fortunately gave him the go-ahead to take over this farm. It's a 16-acre site. He's got no experience, and I mean no experience at all on growing, right? Sells the food bedding plants outside the house to raise money, and is a landscape garden designer by profession. So he understands plants, but he's not a gardener even, Now, interestingly, his grandfather was the most amazing grower you could ever come across, and so was his great-grandfather. So that's where I see that knowledge, is somewhere there in the background of the psyche of, I'm a great believer in things are passed down to you, even if you don't know they're there. And he's taken on board setting up this 16-acre site. It's a completely no-dig site. He's working on Charles's theory of no-dig. He's building this beautiful little farm up called Jubilee Farm, and they've put in massive amounts of veg beds, which, I've supplied him with compost and stuff. He's now growing. He's now looking to open a farm shop. He's been selling a few bits outside the house, getting really great feedback from the public because of the organic side. Interestingly, on this one as well, Liz, was he applied and was granted 200 apple trees or fruit trees, sorry, for the farm by organisations that have always told me in the past that there's no money for fruit trees. We have to set native hedgerows and native trees like, you know, conker trees or oak trees, something like that. They've changed their tune. They're now telling people to set fruit trees. Now, knowing that if you plant a fruit tree in 2024, takes a good few years to get a tree going properly, but by 2030, they're going to be harvesting a lot of fruit. Why are they gearing small farms up now to grow fruit? And they haven't been in the past. So that one's an intriguing question as far as I'm concerned, because whether there's people inside this dark, desperate system, what we all hate, and I don't like that word, but despise, whatever you want to call it, there is obviously people in that system that are still good people that are trying to push through things like, well, plant apple trees, plant, you know, hazelnut trees, you know, plant chestnut trees and things like this. So short-term, mid-term and long-term stuff. So it's been interesting to follow that down the system and see how the things he's applying for now and that he's getting planning permission for now, I couldn't 5 years ago. So, you know, under, you know, just a village away from where he's working. So I think there is things afoot. And whether somewhere in this dark agenda, they just want to break down small farms, big farms, sorry, back into small farms, whether or not that's their plan, I don't know. It's certainly my plan. It's certainly the agenda I'm working to go out and talk to farmers about giving up 2 or 3 acres of land to, you know, to be in a position to get someone who wants to grow growing. So that all excites me. I'm seeing people working on heritage seed, and I'm actually going to see my cousin this week. Or no, I think it is, yes, a couple of weeks' time. He's got an open day, and one of the things I'm taking with me, which really excites me, is I've got some seed what was given to me, some runner bean seed given to me by my granddad 55 years ago, or, you know, 50 years ago, sorry. And 5 years old, I grew. We sold the runner beans on the side of the road. I got the money. I kept some of the seed. Next year I did the same, and next year I did the same, and these seed are now 50 odd years old. A generation of keep the seed, and I've got some of that seed which I'm going to hand over to him, and that excites me because that to me is the epitome of my granddad's knowledge still being here, you know. So that it just brings tears to my eyes, because for his side, he's all about heritage, he's all about biodiversity, you know. He understands that he's done so much research. He's just hungry to want to learn. And they're the people we need to see coming through the system. They're the people we need people to get behind. You know, the public need to get behind these people. The public need to be in a position that they start shopping differently. And that's one of the things I think more so than anything we've got to see is this twist in people spending. Come back to what I started with. If we take away the power from the supermarkets and transfer that to small independent farmers and growers, we're on a winner. And that is going to be something what's going to stop them in their tracks, because they don't know how to deal with independent people. And I'll tell you why. If you want to bring down Tesco's, let's say Sainsbury's, you've got to only attack one company. And, you know, so if the government wanted to take it out on those companies, they could, because they're just one company. There's tens of thousands of us across the country, and they haven't got the time, the manpower, the research ability. You know, what they're going to do, send drones around to everybody's house to make sure they're not, you know, we're going to get your neighbour to dob you in. Do all that. There's too many of us, and there's too many of us across the planet, you know. And I think people need to just take a stock on this situation, stop doing what you're told, question everything, and most of all, take away their power.
Mark, that's absolutely incredible. Thank you very much. I've sat here and you can see totally engaged with you and totally smiling. I had to smile talking to the great Catherine McBean this morning. I was talking about, you know, when I was young on the farm, we didn't even have an inside toilet. And the outside toilet, everything was pumped back onto the land.
Absolutely.
Plowed back in. And people don't understand that. They throw up their hands in horror if a dog craps on the side of the road. I must admit, you don't want to stand on it on a pavement. Okay, that's fine. But
Yeah.
they don't know about the life cycle of
No.
what do flies feed on? Why is the dung in the field? Why do rabbits eat, sheep and everything eat their own dung because of the nutrients that go back into the body?
Absolutely.
They've got no idea how. I don't know what they teach in schools these days. It fills me with absolute horror. They
Well, I think
certainly
we do know. I think we do know what they teach, and that does fill you with horror.
Yes, you're quite right. But there's no nutrition. You talked earlier about doctors spend a couple of hours talking about nutrition.
Yeah.
Nutrition is that you heard the great Dr. Sarah Myhill when you came to speak at Swindon.
Yes.
And, Sarah Myhill says the key to most of the things that go wrong with the body is whatever you put into it. So if
Yes,
you eat properly, as you say, why do you need to go to a doctor? You eat properly, 6 or 7 fresh veg a day going into cook properly. Where is cooking these days at school? Who knows
Not even on the agenda.
No, who knows how to cook? So it's all done. It's the long march through the institutions to take this all away from us. And you're quite right, we're getting it all back. And like you, I'm really excited. I'm just sorry that I've got rather a few grey hairs now. I wish I was 30 years younger.
So have I.
You're only a boy. Mark, thank you so much.
Liz, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on the show and talking to me.
Right, and this goes out worldwide because I work a lot with farmers in New Zealand, for instance, and
Really?
so they've got what they call the burp and fart tax out there. As you know, a cow burps and farts, and of course, it causes all the methane. The whole
Oh.
world is going to get the whole world.
Horrendous things are going to happen because of animals. I mean, it's just how we survived the last millions of years. I've got no idea.
No idea at all.
I mean, we must have just been lucky.
Yeah, I love it when they call it the burp and fart tax. I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Brilliant.
But they've got such a draconian system now in New Zealand. It's getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
So my whole work is to join the world together. And if somebody could take Bill Gates out and stop him buying up all the farms and getting rid of all the cattle in America. You've got all the food processing companies in America have suddenly all caught fire. You've probably seen all this as well.
Just coincidence, Liz.
I tell you. Anyway, we will get it back. We will get it back, sir. I've got no doubt, especially if you go around with that smile on your face. Keep going, Mark, and thank you very much.
Liz, it's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.